Glacial winds at minus 77 degrees in Appalachia. A single mother fights to keep her children alive. Glacial winds at minus 77 degrees, and 3 souls trapped inside a wooden house that groaned and shuddered with every gust, as if the mountains themselves were trying to crush it beneath the weight of ice and silence. And on the night when the world turned white and deadly, one woman stood between the cold and the only 2 lives that mattered to her more than her own. Her name was Jolene Whitfield. She was 31 years old. She had hands roughened by years of labor, eyes heavy with exhaustion, and a spine that had never once bent under circumstances that would have broken most people twice over. She lived in a leaning clapboard house at the end of a gravel road outside Elkins, West Virginia, deep in the Allegheny Mountains, where the nearest neighbor was 2 miles through dense forest, and the nearest town felt like another country entirely when the snow came down. And the snow was coming down. Not softly, not gently, not in the kind of picturesque flurries that people in cities photograph through their windows while holding mugs of hot chocolate. This snow fell with violence. It fell sideways, driven by a wind that had been born somewhere in the Arctic and had traveled thousands of miles without losing any of its fury, and it hit the wooden walls of the Whitfield house with a sound like sand thrown against glass, constant and merciless and unending. It had started 3 days before Christmas. The National Weather Service had issued warnings that most people in the lowlands read with mild curiosity before returning to their holiday shopping. But up in the hollows, where the roads were narrow and the power lines sagged between old wooden poles, those warnings carried a different weight. They meant isolation. They meant silence. They meant that if something went wrong, no one was coming. Not the ambulance, not the neighbors, nobody. Jolene had prepared as best she could. She had stacked firewood against the side of the house until the pile stood taller than her. She had filled every pot, pan, and bucket with water from the well before the pump froze. She had driven her old Chevy pickup to the Dollar General and spent the last $47 in her bank account on canned beans, powdered milk, peanut butter, and batteries. The cashier, a woman named Brenda who had known Jolene since she was a girl, looked at the items and then at Jolene's face and said nothing. Everyone in Randolph County knew what was coming. Brenda slipped an extra pack of batteries into the bag without scanning them, and their eyes met for 1 second, and that was all the kindness either could afford. Scene: interior of the house. A wood-burning stove glows in the center of a small living room. 2 teenagers sit on a worn couch sharing a blanket. Ethan and Lily were 17. Twins. They had their mother's dark hair and their father's green eyes, though neither had seen that man in over 5 years. He had left on a Tuesday in March, driven away toward a woman in Morgantown who promised him something better, and he had not called or sent a single dollar since. Jolene had cried for 3 days. Then she stopped, and she never cried about him again. There was no room for grief in a life that demanded every ounce of energy just to keep moving forward. Ethan was tall and lean, the kind of quiet that people mistook for shyness, but was really the habit of someone who had learned early that words cost energy. He had dropped out of school the previous spring to work at a sawmill 12 miles down the mountain, bringing home $280 a week, which he handed to his mother without being asked. He understood the math of their lives. When his counselor said he was throwing away his future, Ethan looked at the man and said his future did not matter if his family did not survive the present. The counselor had not known what to say. Lily was different. She was fierce in a way that startled people. She argued with teachers, challenged the landlord when the roof leaked, once walked 4 miles through rain to rescue a stray dog shivering by the highway. She had her mother's stubbornness, but none of her silence. Where Jolene endured, Lily burned. She maintained a 3.8 GPA and had told her mother, with a certainty that left no room for debate, that she was going to college. She did not know how, but she knew she was going. On the night of December 22nd, the temperature dropped to minus 40. Jolene fed the stove every 2 hours, crossing the cold floor in wool socks and plastic bags, feeding it logs the way you feed a hungry animal. She had calculated the wood supply carefully. If the cold lasted 3 days, they would make it. If it lasted 5, they would burn furniture. If longer than that, she did not allow herself to think. By midnight, the power went out. It did not flicker. It simply stopped, the way a heart stops, all at once. The refrigerator fell silent. The kitchen bulb went dark. The house seemed to shrink, the walls pressing inward, the cold finding every crack that had been invisible before. Jolene stood still for a moment, closed her eyes. One breath, then another. Then she fed the stove 2 more logs, and the fire surged orange across the walls, and she thought, "We have the fire. We have each other. That is enough." But it was not enough, and she knew it. Ethan appeared in the doorway with a flashlight, 2 sweatshirts and his sawmill overalls. He looked at her and something passed between them without words. It was the look of 2 people who have lived through enough hardship together that they no longer need language to communicate the important things. His face said, "How bad is it?" Her face said, "Bad." His face said, "What do we do?" Her face said, "Whatever we have to." "The pipes," he said. "Without power, the heat tape on the water pipes would fail. They would freeze. They would burst." "I wrapped them last week," Jolene said. "All the insulation I had." "It won't be enough." Lily came downstairs wrapped in a sleeping bag, breath in small clouds. She looked at the dark kitchen, at their faces, and understood immediately. "How cold is it going to get?" Jolene turned on the radio. Through static, the NOAA voice read numbers from another planet. Wind chill -60, -70, possible -77. Dangerous, life-threatening. Do not go outside. Lily looked at the radio. "We are in shelter. This is our shelter." "Then we make it work," Jolene said. And her voice carried an authority neither child questioned. Not because they believed she could control the weather, because they had seen her do impossible things before. Small, impossible things. The kind that kept a family alive. Scene: the 3 of them building a shelter inside the living room. Mattresses, blankets, plastic sheeting across doorways. That first night, they pulled everything into the living room, sealed the doorways with towels and plastic, wore layers upon layers. Wool socks, plastic bags, more socks. A trick Jolene's mother had taught her during the blizzard of '93. They drank hot sugar water to keep their core temperatures up. Outside, the wind hit the house like a living thing, and the walls creaked and the windows rattled and the temperature kept falling, -50, -60. Each degree a step further into territory the human body was never designed to survive. Jolene sat between her children. She could feel them breathing through all those layers. She promised herself she would not sleep. She would feed the fire, she would watch the cold, she would keep them alive. That was the first night. There would be 6 more. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories of real people fighting impossible odds are shared here every week, and each one will remind you what the human spirit is truly capable of. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. This is one story you cannot walk away from. By morning, the gravel road had vanished beneath 4 feet of snow. The Chevy was a shapeless white mound. There was only the house, the stove, and the cold. Jolene had not slept. She fed the fire every 90 minutes, navigating by memory and the faint glow from the stove's seams. Each time she opened the iron door, the fire surged, and she watched her children sleep in the orange light before closing it and lying back down to count the minutes until she had to do it again. The wind did not stop. It came from the north, from the Canadian plains where nothing slowed it down, and funneled through the hollows with a force that turned the air into a weapon. At -77, exposed skin suffered frostbite in 2 minutes. Breathing the air directly could freeze the lungs. Scene: Ethan pulling on boots by the back door, Jolene grabbing his arm. "I need to check the woodpile," Ethan said. Jolene wanted to say no, but the math was clear. They were burning wood faster than planned. "Take the rope. Tie it to the porch rail. Do not let go. 5 minutes." He wrapped his face, pulled on 2 pairs of gloves, tied the rope, and opened the door. The cold hit like concrete. Not like air. Not like wind. Like a solid thing, an invisible wall of pain that pressed against every inch of his body simultaneously. His lungs turned to glass. Eyes watered and tears froze on his lashes before they could fall. The woodpile, 15 feet away, was invisible. He held the rope and pushed through waist-deep snow, every step requiring him to lift his entire leg out of the drift and plunge it forward, muscles screaming, breath coming in ragged gasps. He found the pile by touch, grabbed 8 logs, pressing them against his chest like they were made of gold. Followed the rope back. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. When Jolene slammed the door behind him, he collapsed against the wall, unable to speak, his body shaking with a violence that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with what he had just survived. Lily brought warm water for his hands. He hissed as the feeling returned, sharp and burning. "How much is left?" Jolene asked. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, she saw fear. Real fear. "Maybe 2 days' worth, if we cut back." The forecast called for 7 more days. She started with the kitchen chairs, 4 old pine chairs from a yard sale. Ethan broke them apart, dry wood, 8 hours. Then the bookshelf. Lily watched her mother empty it and said nothing, but she held the books to her chest before setting them down, jaw set tight. "We'll get more books," Jolene said. "I know." But it was not about the books. It was about normalcy, about the idea of a life beyond this room and this fire that consumed their home piece by piece. That evening, Lily wrote a letter by firelight to the admissions office of West Virginia University. "My name is Lily Whitfield, and I am writing this by firelight because the power has been out for 2 days, and it is 62 degrees below zero." She wrote about her grades, her brother who gave up school so she could stay, her mother. When she wrote about her mother, her handwriting got smaller, pressing deep. "My mother is the strongest person I have ever known, and she would never tell you that because strong people never do." She folded it into her sleeping bag. The act of writing it was itself survival. Proof she still believed in tomorrow. Jolene saw her daughter writing and felt pride crack open in her chest, fierce and burning and untouchable. Christmas Eve. No tree, no presents. 40 hours without sleep. Her body ached everywhere, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire going dark. Ethan sat beside her. "Mom, you need to sleep." "I'm fine. You're not. If you collapse, we all go down." She looked at him, 17 and speaking like someone who had carried weight his whole life. 4 hours. Wake me in 4. Don't let the fire drop." "I know, Mom." He put his hand on her shoulder, so simple, so full of love that she had to look away. "Go to sleep, Mom. I've got this." She slept. And her son kept the fire alive. The thermometer had stopped registering. The radio said -77, the coldest in West Virginia history. The woodpile was down to 8 logs, 6 hours of heat. She looked at the kitchen cabinets, old solid wood. They would burn for hours. She and Ethan dismantled the kitchen in silence, a rhythm born of years together, anticipating each other without speaking. Lily was pale. A dry cough had settled deep in her chest. Jolene noticed and said nothing. "Lily, drink water." "Not thirsty." "Drink anyway." Lily's hand trembled. Jolene added it to the list. Wood, water, temperature, the cough, Ethan's blistered fingers, her own exhaustion, everything counting down. Scene, afternoon, cracking sounds from beneath the floor. At 2 o'clock, a sound like a gunshot cracked from beneath the floor. Then another, then another. Then a low, agonizing groan that ran the full length of the house from one end to the other, like something enormous and alive was moving through the crawl space beneath them. The 3 of them froze. Ethan looked at the floor. Lily pulled her blankets tighter. Jolene did not move. "The pipes," she said quietly. They had frozen, despite the insulation she had wrapped around them with her own hands a week ago, despite the heat tape that had worked faithfully for years until the power died, despite every precaution, every preparation, every dollar she had spent trying to protect this house from the thing that was now tearing it apart from the inside. The water had expanded as it turned to ice, and the copper could not hold, and now it was splitting open, joint by joint, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. When the cold broke, when the ice melted, the water would pour through the burst seams and flood the crawl space and the floors and the walls, and the damage would be catastrophic. But that was a problem for later. Right now, the problem was simpler and more immediate. They had just lost their last source of running water. Jolene closed her eyes for 3 seconds. She let the weight of it land. Let herself feel, just for those 3 seconds, the full scope of what was happening, the unfairness of it. The cruelty of a world that would do this to a woman whose only crime was being poor and alone and living in the wrong hollow at the wrong time. She let the anger come, and the grief, and the exhaustion that had been building behind her eyes for days. She let it all wash through her like a wave, then opened them. We melt snow. That takes wood. Then we use wood. Something in her voice ended the conversation. The sound of a woman who had accepted this was going to be the hardest thing she had ever done and had decided to do it anyway. If this story is making you feel something, pause and leave a comment. Stay strong, Jolene. Just those 3 words, because sometimes saying it out loud gives it power. She told them about their grandmother Clara. Same mountains. 1960s. No running water, no electricity. Coal stove. Kerosene lamps. She walked 3 miles to school every morning, in shoes that didn't fit. In winter, she followed her father's footprints in the snow going to the mine. She told me once that on the coldest mornings, she would look at those footprints and think, if he can do it, I can do it. What happened to her? Lily asked. She knew, but tonight it sounded different. She survived. Everything the mountains threw at her, poverty, cold, hunger that made her eat bark from trees in the worst winters. Your grandfather, who was not kind and who drank and who left when the mine closed. Losing 2 babies before they were born, burying them herself behind the church because there was no money for a proper service. She survived all of that, alone in these same mountains, and she raised me and she taught me the only lesson that matters. The mountain doesn't care about you. The mountain doesn't care about your plans or your pain or whether you live or die. So you have to care. You have to care about yourself and about the people next to you. You have to make the caring bigger than the cold. That's all survival is. Caring more than the cold. She sounds like you, Ethan said. She was stronger. I don't believe that, Lily said. And the way she said it made Jolene see not a child but a woman, looking at her with a love fierce enough to set the whole mountain on fire. She did not discuss it. There were no options left. She was going to walk to the Henderson house, 2 miles through the forest, waist-deep snow, minus 77 wind chill, because the Hendersons had a generator and a CB radio. No, Ethan said, blocking the door, fury on his face. You'll die out there. We have 12 hours of fuel. After that, nothing. I've burned every chair, every shelf, every cabinet. The only wood left is the walls and floor. I am not going to sit here and watch you and your sister freeze. That is not something any mother is capable of. Then let me go. No, you stay. Keep the fire alive. Keep your sister safe. Wait for me. That is not a request. Scene. Jolene layering clothes. 2 coats, scarves, gloves, plastic bags and boots. She dressed like someone preparing for war. Thermal underwear, jeans, shirts, Carhartt jacket. Her father's hunting coat over it, 2 sizes too big, trapping air for insulation. Scarves until only her eyes showed. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother. 15 seconds of warmth and silence. Come back, she whispered. I always do. Scene. The door opens. White blast. Jolene steps out. Aerial shot of a tiny figure in infinite white. The cold was beyond anything she had known in 31 years. Not weather. Physics. It wrapped around her body the instant she stepped outside and began extracting heat through every gap, every breath, every heartbeat. The air felt like it had weight, like it was pressing down on her from all directions, squeezing the warmth out of her the way you squeeze water from a sponge. She moved through waist-deep snow like a swimmer fighting an invisible current. The forest was a cathedral of ice, every tree coated in a layer so thick the branches sagged toward the ground, and the trunks gleamed like columns of glass. No sound except the wind and her own harsh breathing inside the scarves, each exhalation a burst of hot moisture that froze instantly into crystals that sparkled in the gray light for half a second before the wind scattered them into nothing. She counted steps. 100. Rest. Breathe. 100 more. It was the only way to keep her mind from going to the dark places where she imagined falling and not getting up, where she imagined the snow covering her and no one finding her until spring. At the half-mile mark, she fell. Her foot caught something buried deep beneath the snow, a root or a rock, and she went down hard, face first into the drift. Snow closed over her head. Blind. Deaf. Suffocating in white silence. For 3 seconds, panic seized her completely, erasing every thought, leaving only the animal need to move, and she thrashed and clawed back to the surface, gasping, spitting snow, heart hammering in her temples. She knelt there. Thought about Ethan feeding the fire with the last of the cabinet doors, Lily coughing in her sleeping bag, the 12 hours of fuel that were now 10, maybe less. She stood up. She kept walking, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant her children would be alone, and that was the one outcome she had forbidden from the moment they were born. The second mile was a blur of white and pain, legs burning, lungs raw and aching with every breath, each inhalation like swallowing broken glass, cold pressing through every layer against her skin like ice water seeping through cloth. She could not feel her feet or her fingers. She could no longer count steps. She moved on something beyond strength or willpower or even stubbornness. She moved on love. On the absolute, irrational, unshakable certainty that her children needed her to reach that house, and she would not fail them. Not today, not ever. And then, through the trees, she saw it. A house, a chimney, and smoke. Thin and beautiful and impossible. Smoke rising into gray sky. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant life. Jolene fell to her knees and wept. Not from sadness. From the force of having done the thing she was not sure she could do. She wiped her face. Stood. Walked to the door. Knocked. Carl had mined coal for 40 years. He had seen things underground that would break most people. But he had never seen anything like the woman on his porch, covered in snow, eyelashes frozen, lips bruised blue, shaking so violently she could barely stand, and her eyes absolutely alive. He pulled her inside. Margaret was already moving. Blankets, kettle on the stove. "My kids," Jolene said. First words, "Not help me. My kids." They're alone. Maybe 10 hours of fuel. Carl looked at Margaret, a lifetime in one glance. "I'll get on the radio." 1 hour. Channel 19. Roy Barker on the next ridge had a snowmobile. Doris Coleman had satellite phone contact with the National Guard. Tom Pratt had a truck with chains and 20 years of driving through the impossible. The mountain people organized the rescue the way they organized everything. Radios. Word of mouth. The refusal to let one of their own die alone. Roy headed for Jolene's house with fuel. Tom cut toward the highway. The guard mobilized. Jolene sat in Margaret's kitchen drinking broth that burned her throat going down and spread warmth through her chest like liquid fire, and she listened to the voices on the radio. All those people she thought had forgotten her, and she understood something she had been too tired and scared and proud to see before. The mountain was cold and indifferent, yes, but the people on it were not. They had been there all along, just beyond the snow, just beyond the silence, waiting to be asked for help. And that was the thing about mountain people that outsiders never understood. They did not offer help because offering meant assuming you could not handle things yourself, and that was an insult no one in these hollows would inflict on another person. But the moment you asked, the moment you showed up at a door or called out on a radio, they came. They came without hesitation and without conditions, and without expecting anything in return except the knowledge that you would do the same for them when their turn came. Because everyone's turn came eventually. The mountain made sure of that. Scene: snowmobile headlight through the forest. Sled loaded with supplies. Roy reached the house at 1:14. Ethan heard the engine and saw the headlight bouncing through the trees. He opened the door. "Your mama sent me. She's safe. Help me get this inside." 4 cans of diesel, blankets, a box of food, soup, bread, a jar of homemade jam labeled Henderson, a kerosene heater. Lily looked at the food and pressed her hands to her face, making a sound between laughter and weeping. She made it. She made it. 2 words carrying everything, every hour of cold, every log in the fire, every unspoken prayer. Their impossible, stubborn, unbreakable mother had walked 2 miles through the worst cold in state history and found help and sent it back. Because that is what Jolene Whitfield did. She survived, and she made certain the people she loved survived with her. Scene: December 28th, National Guard truck. The family climbs in. Jolene looks back at the house. The convoy arrived December 28th. The temperature had climbed to -30, which in any other context would have been catastrophic, but in this one felt like spring, like mercy, like a gift from a universe that had spent the last 6 days trying to kill them. Jolene had returned the day before on Roy's snowmobile, her arms wrapped around the old man's waist, her face pressed against his back, and when she walked through the front door and saw Ethan and Lily standing there, alive, whole, warm, she did something she almost never did. She sat down on the floor, right there in the doorway, and she pulled them both to her, one in each arm, and she held them, and she did not let go for a very long time. And none of them spoke, because there are moments in life when words are not just unnecessary, but impossible. When the only language that matters is the language of touch, of presence, of being alive together in the same room at the same time. The soldiers helped them pack what mattered: clothes, Lily's notebook with the letter she had written by firelight, a handful of photographs, the cast iron pot that had belonged to Jolene's grandmother. As they climbed into the truck, Jolene turned and looked at the house one last time. The kitchen had no cabinets, the hallway had no shelves, the rooms had no doors on their hinges, the living room had no chairs, no end tables, nothing except the stove and the mattresses on the floor and the plastic sheeting over the doorways. It looked hollowed out, gutted, like something that had given everything it had to give and had nothing left. And it had given everything. And so had she. 3 months later, a letter arrived from West Virginia University, full scholarship, a handwritten note from the dean. "We received your essay. We have never read anything like it. Welcome to WVU." Lily stood in the kitchen where the new cabinets hung, installed by Carl, Roy, and Tom over a weekend in March, while Margaret Henderson cooked enough food to feed every family in the hollow. The kitchen smelled like fresh pine and paint and something that felt like hope, though hope is not something that has a smell exactly, except that on that morning in that kitchen, somehow it did. Lily held the letter in both hands and read it twice, slowly, letting each word settle into her. And then she looked up at her mother standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression that contained everything a human face is capable of expressing, and their eyes met and neither spoke, because some moments are too large for words and too sacred for language. Ethan came in from stacking firewood, enough for 2 winters, because he would never let them run short again. He saw her face and the letter. "Told you," he said, and smiled wide and unguarded, the kind of smile he almost never allowed himself. The Whitfield house still stands at the end of that gravel road. The chimney smokes in winter. The woodpile is always tall. The neighbors check in. The silence that once surrounded the house has been replaced by connection. Community. The knowledge that no one on this mountain faces the cold alone. And Jolene still works double shifts at the diner, saving for a trip to Morgantown to see Lily's dorm room. On cold nights, she still checks the stove, even when the wood is plentiful and the power is on. Old habits. The habits of a woman who learned that survival is not a single act of heroism, but 1,000 small acts of love, performed in the dark, without an audience, without anything except the knowledge that the people you love are still breathing. The mountain does not care about you, so you have to care about each other. If you watch this all the way to the end, it is because this story meant something to you. If you made it here, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and find out who truly loves the stories on this channel. If Jolene's fight moved you, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that giving up is never an option. And if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe now, because every week we bring stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the world tried to break them. Turn on notifications so you never miss one.